We're on the line now with Economist Isaac Matshego to speak to us about this. Isaac, very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Perhaps let's just first start with the concept of grey listing. It sounds like a cautionary warning as opposed to what we're understanding as blacklisting, that you are already in deep trouble. Explain to us, please, what grey listing means.
Good evening, Tsepiso. Definitely, greylisting is not as bad as, for instance, blacklisting, which would come with some penalties. So greylisting is basically a warning to a country to sort of intensify its monitoring and controls over the movement of money in and out of the country. I mean, we've seen in the past countries such as Mauritius, the Seychelles, even Botswana being placed on the grey list and, being warned to rectify the situation. And all of those countries did address the issues that were raised, and they were removed from the grey list.
So in light of this possible grey listing, we understand the finance minister recently tabled the Anti-Money Laundering and Combating Terrorism Financing Amendment Bill. How will it better align the country with recommendations made by the international watchdog, the Financial Action Task Force, on avoiding this or at least reversing the effects of grey listing?
We must acknowledge that the National Treasury has indicated that measures have been taken since about 2019 to address all the gaps that have been flagged. We've seen, for instance, amendments to the Trust Property Control Act, which are aimed at addressing the gaps that result in the misuse of trusts for money laundering or terrorist financing. So all the measures that are being taken right now are aimed at addressing this issue and avoiding the grey listing. And I'm confident that, progress has been achieved, but it's still a question of whether we will avoid being grey listed in February next year.
Just in terms of this very legislation and the amendment that we're talking about, so the bill will amend other acts dealing with certain sectors of the economy, I believe, that can and have been used by criminals to leverage monetary gain, including Trust Property Control Act, Non-Profit Organizations Act, obviously the Financial Intelligence Center Act, which we're talking about, the Companies Act, and Financial Sector Regulation Act. But just all of these, are you able to give us example of the most gross transgressions of either of these? We've just been through state capture hearings that have lasted for a very long time, including the report now. But I think people are just at sea as to how all of these legislation in place are being used to hold people to book, because it still feels like we've spent a whole lot of money for nothing.
Sure. I mean, it's quite clear, at least, from what we heard from the Zondo Commission, that a lot of money was laundered from South Africa. And, it's going to be difficult to trace that money now because the controls were lacking a bit, at least according to the warnings that we have received. So what basically needs to happen is the strengthening of all that regulation. I mean, I can quote our Chief Executive, Mr. Mike Brown, who likened regulation to a relay race. Every team player has got to play their part, so to speak, and make sure that the baton is not dropped. So it seems that in South Africa, along the regulation chain, there were a lot of, lapses, and as a result of that, a lot of money was laundered, and unfortunately, those lapses are coming back to bite us.
But is there a good story to tell, so to speak, because we understand that recent data from the Financial Intelligence Center's latest annual report shows that there's been a considerable increase when compared to the year before, where only 3.3 billion rand was recovered from criminal activity. So is there a greater uptake from institutions to work with these institutions to report financial crime and prevent it?
Definitely. I mean, recently in South Africa, we've seen a number of institutions being penalized for some of the lapses. And, we can only, hope and actually expect that those mistakes will not be repeated, and we will see the strengthening of the regulation chain.
So as I mentioned, the success through the growing number of proactive and reactive intelligence reports compiled alongside with the efficient use of technology to monitor compliance. But I want to understand how we're using technology to conduct some of these intelligence operations, and to what effect. So there's been an improvement, but is it significant enough?
I will say that South Africa definitely is, keeping up with the development when it comes to the use of technology globally. But we're talking about global syndicates here, and those are often a step ahead of the authorities. Yes, the authorities always have to ensure that all the loopholes are closed, have to ensure that there is no gap for criminals to really conduct the illicit activities. But unfortunately, with our limited resources in South Africa, I mean, there's the challenge faced by other developed economies. We do lack sometimes.
Isaac, very briefly, so limited resources, yes, but we're not short on that in terms of laws. So it just comes down to implementation and, of course, compliance. But do we have stiff enough penalties in place to discourage such behavior?
Well, the penalties are all relative. For instance, let's talk about the money laundered under state capture. Can we have enough penalties for those? So the point I'm making is that the system has got to be evolving all the time, has to keep up with the violations of all these acts, and of course the acts have to be updated and all the systems have to be strengthened.
So as you say, as the crime escalates, so must the countermeasures. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Isaac Matshego is an economist just looking at the possibility of South Africa's greylisting, the impact on the economy, and how we can amend, or rather make amends. So let's leave it there for now. We are